the oyster bar, drinking a little, doing what we did. And then I interviewed her for my daughter's blog, website, newsletter, Lenny, which was another, I don't know how long we talked.
It was a while.
It was a while. So now we're going to talk again in public. And my challenge is I have many slides. I mean, we don't call them slides anymore. I have many images. And Molly and I are going to try to have a conversation, but I'm going to try to pay attention to this. So I don't know how it's going to go, but we'll make something happen. We promise.
So I suppose I should start from the beginning. I mean, you already said that you didn't necessarily consider yourself a photographer, but more as an artist who used the camera. Why did you decide to use the camera instead of choosing a different medium?
Your first question is a really great question.
Thank you.
I think that when I came to New York after a very formal, rigorous art school education, I wanted to understand what was really going on. And it was a time when conceptual art and process art and video and things were just bursting wide open. So my education, which was printmaking, painting, and sculpture, didn't seem relevant. And we're talking about like 1973, 1974. And what I saw in conceptual art, what I saw in fashion, conceptual art really was about people picking up a camera because they had to document what they were doing. Fashion was really amazingly exciting then, between Deborah Tuberville and Chris von Wangenheim and Helmut Newton and on and on. And I just thought, you know, a camera, maybe that's an interesting tool. And also, I wasn't aware of a lot of women photographers at the time, so I thought, maybe this path is a little clearer for me than this path of painting or sculpture or this history, this art history that I knew. And as it was taught to me, most of the characters were male. So I think I, like a number of other women artists at the time, kind of saw a clear path to something that we might be able to invent or at least mold into our own.
And how did you actually learn how to take pictures? Because when you started, of course, you weren't working with digital. You weren't working as you work now. You had to work with a dark room. Did somebody actually teach you the technique?
Kind of, yes. I shared a loft with the photographer Jimmy DeSana, who died of AIDS in 1990. I'm also the executor of his estate, and his work is, I have to put in a plug because so many young artists are discovering his work now, but we got a 200-foot long loft in Soho for no money. Everyone loves that or hates it. We put a dividing wall in between, and I built a darkroom, he had a darkroom, and basically I just started with a book and trying to figure out what to do. I'd walked out of a photography class in art school because I thought, frankly, photography wasn't art, so that was that. I just dismissed it. And he taught me everything I knew, and when he wasn't around, there was this thing called a Kodak hotline, and you could call, and there was a guy on the other end who sounded, and it's not that kind of hot. There was a guy on the other end who sounded like an astronaut, but I called so many times that I started disguising my voice and putting on different accents because I thought, this guy's not going to answer any more of my questions. So between Jimmy DeSana's instruction and what I learned from the Kodak man, I was really self-taught.
And so tell us a little bit about the series that we're looking at right now.
This is work that this was work that was made when I was having those really private days in the darkroom with Jimmy DeSana. So this dates around 75, 76.
This is before you were married, yes?
Yes, before I was married. So this is the first work that I ever actually exhibited. So this dates like 1978 when I switched to color. And my first show was at Artist Space in New York in 1979, and it got reviewed in the Village Voice, which is still one of the most exciting things that's ever happened to me. And it was reviewed by Ben Lifson, and he called me a feminist artist. The article was called Robert Frank and the Track of Life. And even though I was sort of a baby blooming feminist, I was so floored to be referred to. I was so surprised to be referred to as a feminist artist.
Did you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes, I did. But I didn't think that I was making art about that, nor did I want to, because I felt like the generation before me had kind of marginalized themselves by calling themselves feminist artists. And I just, like a lot of women in my generation, I wanted to play with the big boys. I wanted to do everything that was available to do. I wanted to hang in museums, which is what eventually led me to make big prints. These prints were like 4 by 5 inches.
When you look back on the art now, do you see it as...
I didn't make that. Okay.
When you look back on the art now, do you view it as feminist art? I mean, you say that you were surprised at the time, but when you look at it now, to me it does seem feminist. But I say that in a good way, because I think feminist is not a bad word.
I don't think feminist is a bad word, and it's starting to become clear to me that a number of young women do think feminist.
Do think it's a bad word,
And I'd like to know why, but I think that I was making work about memory. Those pictures were not a critique about a housewife being enmeshed in her own possessions or being trapped in her own home. I sort of loved art like this. I'm calling it art, but this is something from Life magazine. I mean, these were the kinds of pictures that just drove me crazy. My father...
I courted an angel and married a cook.
Yeah. Which is incredible. But my father was a dentist who had an office in our house, and he had huge magazines, like big Look magazines and Life magazines, and I was reading that stuff when I was really young. And he used to invite me and my sisters into the office to read. I think he wanted it to look like he had more patience. But I didn't mind. He had a great fish tank, and he had these beautiful magazines. So that's where my image, my visual brain started to work in his office. And I think that I had a memory of that period of time as being so idealized. And I lived in suburbia. It was so beautiful on the surface. And I wanted to make work that was as beautiful as the work in Life magazine. I wanted my pictures to look like that. This is another picture that's from quite a bit later on, like 2001, called The Instant Decorator, made from a book that encourages you to decorate your own room. But even the placement of food, the way it was mapped out in grocery stores and in magazines, I feel like that, I can't get over that inspiration, that initial inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
And this is from the Cowboy series that you, I read that these figures you took from your husband.
Yeah, they were his toys when he was little, and he called them the big figures. And he had them, and I thought I feel like in my work that I've gone back and forth between shooting surrogates, dolls, mannequins, and then trying to shoot real people, and also trying to shoot men. Trying to sort of balance out the picture so that I'm not just a woman who takes pictures of women, even though I feel like my subject is and always has been woman in interior space. Even my films are that. So this was a way to deal with men, because these were the guys that would have been on the TVs in the homes in the 1950s, all those shows like Gunsmoke and I can't remember any of the
Men
other.
and Cowboys has, I think, been sort of idealized the way that women have been idealized in the domestic sphere, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, were you sort of juxtaposing those two?
Well, I feel like
images?
the perfect housewife and the cowboy kind of make a great couple
Yeah.
in some world.
But don't really belong together, really.
No, and I know that we think of another artist's work when we see this, but the Marlboro ads really did have a very strong effect on me, as did the cowboy shows, just in terms of, kind of wanting to command that imagery or take it or own it and have it be my own. This was another, just to give dates, 1983, color-coordinated interiors, when I got this set of Japanese dolls. They're called T-nets, and it was a Japanese toy maker's idea of what an American girl looked like. And I would just color coordinate them with rooms, because I think the most striking feature of the home I grew up in is that everything was color coordinated. In the most amazing way. But, my whole, I am programmed to see color coordination. I can tell you that your lipstick and your hat match.
They do.
Yeah, but I'm programmed to make those connections because of how rigorous the steps were that everybody took to make sure that the world matched in some way.
Do you feel like in your art, have you used the color coordination from your youth at all, from your house, or has it played into your art at all?
Yes, I feel like these blue women in a blue room, I feel like the color part, I love shooting black and white, but I feel that I'm really most conversant in color, that I really understand color. And I did, as a child, in a strange way. I could identify people's lipsticks. If you had to have a pair of shoes dyed to match a dress, I didn't have to use the color chart. And these were things that
you just intrinsically understood.
But the idea of having shoes dyed to match a dress right now is it's so outside of any way that we think, but it was really important.
I feel like I still come from a generation that dyed the shoes to match the dress. I mean, it's something that's not done now, but and before it was gloves as well, right?
Yeah.
Gloves, shoes, hat, dress.
Right.
Can you give a feeling of actually the size of these dolls?
The dolls are about 4 inches high, and then the prints. It was really important for me to take the images out of the scale of the dolls, so the prints are 5 feet, 6 feet. I mean, my prints go up to being 10 feet by 5 feet. So these were really large, but the dolls were really small. And in this series, I took the dolls out into the world and moved them around the most kind of cliched monuments and tourist spots, because I was starting to have a consciousness that the monuments, the things that we think about, like Stonehenge and the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower, and they're all very, how can I say this? They're very phallic, and they're very, the great monuments are built by men. So this idea that I had these little dolls that were traveling from place to place in my world and then blowing them up to a much larger scale was really appealing to me.
And by this point, you were married. You got married in 77, right?
83.
Oh, 83.
Well, we got together in 77, yeah.
And do you feel like getting married and having children affected your art in any way?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because if someone asked me that question 20 years ago, I would refuse to answer the question, because I felt like all artists should be on a level playing field, men and women, gay and straight, and people were not asking men that question. Now I think it's really important to answer the question, because there are so many young women who feel like it's not, young women artists who feel like it's not appropriate to have children, and a number of them have actually come to me and asked me my thoughts about it, about the idea of being an artist and having a child. Of all of the things that everybody says about Hillary Clinton, I haven't heard anybody criticize her for being a mother, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or Meryl Streep, or Margaret Thatcher. So why the conversation exists in our world is something, my world, not your world, the art world, is really baffling to me. But I think that one of my answers about the way that having children changed my work was that it made the structure of going into the studio much more I have to get in there on these days, and I can't work all night in the same way that I used to. So
You became more regimented.
exactly, and it
About
was
your
fun.
time.
You know, the life pre-regiment was really fun, but that's one of the ways that it really affected.
But to me, I feel like going back to that idea that being a feminist, you know, having that word be a loaded word, bad, having a bad connotation, I feel like being a mother somehow could be seen as a negative connotation. And I feel like being a mother influencing your art, why would that ever be considered a bad thing?
Well, I don't know if being a mother per se influenced my work, although it's interesting that the works that are up right now are from the ventriloquism series. 1987, I made 3 trips to a ventriloquist museum down south and photographed hundreds of dummies against a background. And it did occur to me that I was moving the dummies around and carrying them and then going back home and picking up a child who weighed relatively the same. And, you know, oftentimes I think that an artist is the last to know what the connections really are. When I was making the work, my take on making the work was that this was, I made these pictures in 1986, 1987, 1988. I was really coming into my really full-blown adult political awareness. So what I was thinking about is who's actually speaking? Who's really speaking when we read the newspaper? Who is really speaking when we listen to a politician? Who is really speaking when we listen to newscasters? Like, where is the information coming from? It was like the moment when I became mature enough to understand how to disseminate all the information that was coming at me. So that's what I was saying these pictures were about. The fact that they mirrored, you know, carrying small children around or a child was something that I can see in hindsight.
Oh, I love this series. What was the inspiration for this series that you revisited fairly recently? Didn't you? I mean, for the New York magazine.
Oh yeah, I did, for
piece.
making the film for New York Magazine, which was really fun to do. This was my friend Jimmy DeSana in the camera. The camera was from the movie The Wiz. We were able to borrow it from the Museum of the Moving Image, and he wore it. And we both, this is 1987, we both knew that he was dying of AIDS. Not something we talked about a lot, but this was an homage to him in the sense that he taught me everything I knew, and he loved posing for it. And it makes me so happy that people associate this picture probably first and foremost with my work, because it's so much about him and my relationship with him. And I think that the reason I thought about doing these objects on legs was that the ventriloquist series had been so much about the brain, and I wanted to think about brawn and the way that we as women or people just have to hold up the possessions of our life, that we become subsumed by them, we become defined by them. So in a sense, this was more of a kind of classic feminist statement than the early dollhouse pictures.
That feeling of carrying around a lot.
Well, I mean, who hasn't felt like that?
I feel like that every day.
Yeah.
I have to, for some reason, I carry a handbag and a bigger bag and then like a satchel, and every day I find myself carrying so much stuff, and I think it is purely psychological. You know, it's like I need to manifest everything in what I'm actually carrying, and this whole series reminds me of that.
Yeah, well, you need to take your life with you. I mean, I think that a lot of people feel that.
Yeah, it could have to do with living in the suburbs too, you know.
Yeah.
Carrying you know, you feel like you're not going to have access to
Right.
things, but also just the weight of it. And this is such a great image, you know, that feeling of time.
Well, it was a long time ago now. It was, I think the date of this is either 89 or 91, but I really was starting to think about aging and all of the ways that I could portray that without, you know, hitting you over the head with it.
Have you felt susceptible to that? I mean, I know now you're acting. You've added that to your art. But I've always thought that sort of being an artist or, working in radio or something like that would make you feel not as susceptible to
the idea of
aging. But is that just a complete fallacy?
Yes.
Tell me why. Tell us why.
Well, I think that one of the great things about being an artist, and I talked about this with artist friends and artist families, we're never going to retire. There's no retirement in the future. I mean, I will work on whatever I can work on until the very end. But I think that it would be impossible to be a woman in our culture. And, the United States, we're manic about youth. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be impossible to be a woman. You'd have to live under a rock not to think about issues around aging. It doesn't mean that everyone hates the age that they are or wants to be young, but it's there for us to see every single day. I mean, you're in an interesting position, Molly. Can I talk about your play?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. Molly is playing Aurora in Terms of Endearment off Broadway, which was the part played by Shirley MacLaine. And it's hard to realize because in the 80s, women were represented so differently culturally and in terms of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. The idea that you're the same age now that Shirley MacLaine was when she played Aurora is amazing to me.
Almost unfathomable. Yeah, when I first got the call and they said Terms of Endearment, the first thing I thought, of course, was the Deborah Winger part, and I thought...
Yeah, me too.
Well, I'm a little too old for that, and then when I realized it was the Shirley MacLaine role, I mean, it was like I had to take a step back.
Yeah.
Step back.
I did get a couple of emails and texts.
You did, yeah. And I actually, I said I need the weekend to think about it, and and Laurie, I think you were you were the first person I wrote to, and then on your advice and also my own mother's advice, I decided to do it. And mostly just because there are very few parts for women of any age at all, and particularly a part that was this good. I thought I can't pass this up. But it is true that 48 right now in 2016 is completely different than it was in 1980, 83, 84, right. When I'm not sure of the year. But it has changed a lot. And back to your idea of, or your what you said about aging, I don't think it's only women also that feel the I don't want to say threat, but feel the emotional impact of age. I think it's something that men feel a great deal, and they're completely, even though they do get a pass in a way physically that women don't get, I still feel like there is that impact on men as well as women.
I do think that, and I know again as an artist, I think about all of the work that I want to do, everything that's left to do, and I start thinking about everything I've done and the amount that's left to do, and I start counting and think, do I have enough years left to do,
say everything you want to say in your art?
200 more bodies of work if I have that. I think that everyone is just battling the idea of a limited amount of time, and that's
universal.
Yep.
I think. So this is still part of the same series.
These are one of the few times I ventured into making sculpture. I had these dummies made to photograph, and then I put them in chairs and hung them on the wall so that people could confront them at eye level. And this was at the museum in Nuremberg. But the dummies inspired the first movie that I made, The Music of Regret, which was a musical in 3 acts, and it kind of was a way for me to say goodbye to all the series I'd done up until 2006.
And you wrote the music. I mean, could we talk about the...
I wrote the lyrics.
And they're beautiful.
Michael Rohatton wrote the melodies, which are beautiful. Yeah, there was a moment there when I thought, this is it. I'm a lyricist. I'm veering off. But that was really one of the most amazing parts. And I cast... The dummy is an image of me. And then I cast Meryl Streep to play the dummy. So that's her. And
She's just some actress that you know has done a couple movies.
Right.
How did you end up with Meryl Streep in your project?
Well, I knew her. I've known her for years. Her husband is a sculptor, a very well-known sculptor, and I knew that Meryl liked to sing. And this was before Mamma Mia, and I knew that if I played the songs that she would say yes, and she completely fell in love with the songs. And she was going to be able to sing with Adam Gettle, who wrote Light in the Piazza, who also was the grandson of Richard Rodgers. So there were lots of things in my favor, things that I thought as an actor that she would want to do. And this is...
Was it daunting at all, your first experience directing a film, directing Meryl Streep?
Well, you don't direct Meryl Streep. I mean,
A good answer.
you just stand there and she
just does
the
her
thing
thing.
perfectly. So that was really not a directing experience.
It's a beautiful movie.
This was one of my favorite scenes where she was singing a song in Hawaiian on the beach with the dummy. And we wrote the song in Hawaiian. I mean, I had
Oh, did you?
Yeah. This was a scene where a lot of the props from my former work started to, the gun did a tango, the cake did got up on toe, and the clock did
This is the film that you did for New York Magazine.
No, this is from the original Music of Regret.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So these were props that were made to look exactly like the props in my photographs. This is another series where I played with the idea, it's called Cafe of the Inner Mind, and I played with the idea of trying to understand very flat-footedly, obviously, private versus public space, and also in a very flat-footed comic book way, what do men think about? Because I had seen all of these signs tacked on people's walls when I was growing up saying, what do women think about? What do women want? It seemed to be an ongoing question. So in this series, I tried to mine the idea of private versus public space, as well as starting to work with Photoshop for the first time, and just thinking about what people daydream about.
And what are they thinking about? What would you...
The guy, it's actually to my right, the guy is thinking about his mother. Oh. And that's a shot that was a photograph from the Ventriloquist Museum. The guy in the middle, it's hard to remember why I picked these, but he was thinking about a missile. You know what, it's really hard to. And I guess the guy on the left was thinking about a great pair of gams that he saw at some point in Striped. But I mean, it was the idea of the difference, you know, and this is just a picture from up in, we're at 1998, some pictures that I threw in that I think I've shot like 22, between 22 and 30 series. I've shot so many pictures that nobody's ever seen. I mean, I've seen them and cataloged them, but it's really, it's both interesting and difficult to have a talk like this and decide, like, what pictures would I show? Because there probably will run through 90 images, but there could be five different PowerPoints with, 100 different images. So it always feels so random, like, what am I going to...
Yeah, and it's a lot of time to cover also. I mean,
it's
you've been at this for a while.
A lot of time to cover. This is just, in 1998, I was pushing the idea of living in dreams and castles, and these are pictures that very few people have seen, but it was called White House Green Lawn, and I just moved around an architectural model that just felt so much like the essence of a kind of suburban feeling. I really often like to shoot without figures or dolls, which is interesting for me because if I'm standing in the gallery and people come in, if I'm exhibiting the work, they're coming in looking for a doll. They're coming in looking for a figure. And it's almost amazing to see people's eyes glaze over, like, where's the doll? I'm out of here. But I need to do it, and I do it periodically. I just make really empty spaces.
And why do you do it?
Because it feels right to me. I mean, it just feels like where I want to. You know, sometimes the places that I want to be don't have figures in them, and I feel like that's where I am when I look through the viewfinder.
Sort of like being the difference between being an extrovert and being an introvert. Like these images to me seem more introverted.
Exactly.
And more peaceful in a way.
And someplace that I just like to go stand, because the experience of shooting through a viewfinder, and this is more true for me when I'm shooting still photographs than when I'm shooting film, is that I really feel like I'm there. Whatever the camera factors out, or whatever I lose in my peripheral vision, makes me feel that I'm physically standing in that place, which reminds me of the feelings that I had when I would sit on my mother's lap and she would read a book. And I had this very profound in the book, and to be able to walk in that street. I think a lot of people,
I feel like it evokes the same thing in the viewer. It's like reading a book that doesn't, I tend to gravitate towards authors that don't describe the person physically in detail, so I can invent my own image. And these images do that for me, where you imagine this.
Longhouse, and I started cutting out figures and putting them inside a house with furniture, and it was instead of being pristine, it was very degraded. It felt more like a bordello or something, and I kind of loved shooting in a different kind of space.
She had very sexy granny pants on.
She did.
Can we go back to her for a second?
That's because she's from, all of these figures I saved, this is both embarrassing and very practical, I saved all my fashion magazines, my Mademoiselles, my Glamours, my 17s.
Wow.
And I have huge stacks of them, which they're incredibly a great resource for ideas, for...
So these images are cut out of magazines?
Yep. And then they're interspersed with real furniture. And they're kind of got me into more of a cartoon noir kind of world. And this was three sculptures that I found that were at an antique show that were made by a Latvian artist called Artis Winkler. And they were beautiful. They almost looked like stage sets, but I got them, and I decided to interrupt them with my own characters, and I decided that the little blue man was the artist himself, Artis Winkler.
It looks like she's flashing.
She's flashing.
She is. Okay, that wasn't just me.
But I love that image. I mean, the whole image of whether it's Marilyn Monroe in 7-Year Itch, or just this idea of
can girl.
Yeah. So again, I took the sculptures that were made by this artist who lived in the 40s, who I never knew, and kind of took it for myself and put my own characters in there, sinister as they are.
I think they're beautiful.
Thank you.
How do you get the images actually to stand up? Do you have to put backs on them? Or?
You just put, this is all like the glue and tape and smoke and mirrors and all of the little things that, I've just had years of having objects fall over while I'm shooting. Just years.
How long does,
Whoops.
oh, hello. How long does it take you actually to, I love that we're just going to stop on this photograph.
Well, there's 7 that are like this, so we should either start talking about them or...
How long does it usually take you to do a photograph? Does it completely vary depending on the photograph itself, or is there
I work in series, so when I get an idea, I set it up and I shoot and I shoot and I shoot, and a series can go on for 2 years or 1 month, depending on. It's hard. I'm sure a lot of artists would share these feelings with me, but I know when things are over. I know when they begin, and I know when they're over. Okay, how many minutes do we have left? Sorry? Oh, okay.
I think there's once again, Laurie, we've gone over the amount of time, which means that we're going to have to set up another public event so we can keep talking.
Okay. But I can Just scroll. We don't have to talk about them, but since they're here.
What would you like to say about this series before we go into the questions?
I would like to say about this series that when I finished, that's Walt Disney. When I finished making, when I finished making my movie, I felt like I'd left so much work behind, and I felt like I needed to start with no nostalgia and with a naked person. So I downloaded internet porn, free internet porn, which are probably college girls that needed extra money, and I've only showed that work once. The reaction from women who thought they knew my work was they were so shocked. Mm-hmm. I have 100 of them. I love them all, but I put them away very, very, very quickly.
And the response, when you say they were shocked, would you say
puzzled,
that they were upset by it?
I think they were puzzled. I think, again, people thought that they knew who I was, and I wasn't that person.
So this is one of the questions from the audience. You transitioned from black and white into color in your early work. Did this choice have to do with the idea of the time that black and white connotes the real and color could create a more constricted fantasy world?
I think, I've never thought about it that way before, but I think I have to praise whoever wrote that question, because I often think about when Dorothy, we all know when Dorothy went to Oz and basically the lights were turned on and her fantasy life was exposed in beautiful emerald living color, so Technicolor, right? So
that was.
Can I just flip through my slides?
Yeah, sure. Okay. This is the Living Dolls series that you did.
Okay.
And was this the first time that you, other than the work that you did with the objects on legs, you weren't working with little dolls.
This is the first time I ever worked with life-size characters that weren't human.
I always feel like that girl on the couch looks like Cindy Sherman.
Really?
Is that just me? Does she look like Cindy?
A little bit. I see that. Okay.
This is another question from the audience. Early reading of your work often placed it within the feminist camp, yet you have taken issue with that reading. Well, we already talked about that. Is there anything more that you would like to say about that?
Well, I think it's part of the reading, but I don't think it's completely and easily explained by that. I think that there are so many other emotional and psychological factors that go into my making what I make. It's not as dogmatic as that. It's just not.
What was behind your decision to work with film, since filmmaking is not in your roots?
I kept, in my shoots, kind of upping the ante. I'm just flipping through these. I needed more and more moving parts when I was shooting. And I can't think of another situation, except if you're, a general of a large army, where there are so many moving parts, as there are in making a film. There's the writing of the script, the editing of the script, trying to raise money to make the movie, and trying to actually make the movie, and then the editing, sound edit, and the visual. It's so completely engaging and gripping.
And everything needs to work together.
Everything needs to work together.
Something about these dolls that I think, these are male dolls, and then you had the female dolls, and it's interesting to me that all of the male dolls seem to have their mouth open and all the women seem to have their mouth shut. Is that anything that you've thought about?
That was a medical doll, and his mouth was open. I borrowed it from a hospital. It was, pictures went with Nico Muley's opera, Two Boys. So I made the pictures for that opera, for the Met. But yes, I thought it was fascinating.
These are
people in masks
who are doing the whole sort of anime scene.
This is Japanese cosplay. This is more recent work, and these are selfies taken by these people wearing the masks. But what I really wanted to get to were these are the most recent pictures. They're called How We See, and the fashion model's eyes are closed.
They're so beautiful and so creepy.
They're creepy.
They really are. But they're striking. You can't you can't stop looking at them.
Well, because it's like that classic, there's something wrong with this picture.
Yeah.
And there is. Their eyes are closed. And I think that it speaks to so many of the things that I'm thinking about identity politics, and the idea, this is a transgender woman actually, and the idea that, that the person that we meet on the internet, the person that we project on the internet, may not be the person we think it is at all. I mean, I'm so interested in false identity now, and the way we're able to mask our identity. Sorry, I'm speeding through the end, but we are done.